That night, sitting alone in that freezing motel room while families everywhere celebrated together, I made a decision that would flip our entire family dynamic upside down. Within 3 months, David was desperately calling me every day, but by then I had sold my house, moved across the country, and started a new life where I held all the cards, and they had to earn every minute of my time. Now, Amanda wishes she'd never left me in that parking lot. David regrets choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. But me? I've never felt more free, and I've never been happier to be exactly where I belong. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been abandoned by family during what should have been special moments? Share your story below, because today you're going to learn that sometimes the people who throw you away are about to discover they just discarded the most valuable thing in their lives. This story is about the Christmas Eve when I learned that 35 years of putting my family first meant absolutely nothing when their convenience was on the line. When I discovered that the son I'd raised as a single mother after his father walked out had married a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obligation to be managed and, when necessary, discarded. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and for the past 3 years, I'd been the perfect accommodating mother and grandmother, always adjusting my plans to fit everyone else's schedules, always saying yes when they needed help, always making myself smaller so their lives could be bigger. I lived in a cozy ranch house in Millfield, Ohio, about 40 minutes from David's suburban home in Columbus, close enough to help with my twin granddaughters, 6-year-old Emma and Lily, but far enough away that I wasn't interfering in their daily routines. What I didn't realize was that being the perfect accommodating mother actually meant being the family member whose needs never mattered, whose feelings were never considered, and whose presence was tolerated only when it served everyone else's purposes. Let me tell you about the life I'd built before I became the woman who said yes to everything and expected nothing in return. I met Thomas Sullivan when I was 22, working as a receptionist at Buckeye Manufacturing in downtown Columbus. Thomas was 26, a charming sales representative with a smile that could light up a room and dreams that seemed bigger than Ohio itself. He talked about traveling, the world, starting his own business, building a life filled with adventure and success. When he asked me to marry him after dating for 8 months, I believed we were going to conquer the world together. Our wedding was small but beautiful, held at St. Catherine's Church with 50 guests and a reception at the local VFW hall that my mother had decorated with flowers from her own garden. Thomas looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, and I felt like a princess in my mother's altered wedding dress. We honeymooned at Niagara Falls, staying in a modest hotel but feeling like we owned the world. For the first 2 years of our marriage, life felt full of possibility. Thomas was doing well in sales. I had been promoted to office manager at the manufacturing company, and we'd saved enough money to buy a small starter home in Millfield, a 3-bedroom ranch with a big backyard and enough space for the children we planned to have. We painted every room ourselves, planted a garden, and hosted barbecues for friends who were all building similar dreams of suburban happiness. Thomas and I tried for children for 3 years before David finally arrived. 3 years of temperature, charts, doctor visits, and the kind of hope that gets a little more fragile each month. When David was born on a cold February morning in 1987, I thought I understood what joy meant. He was perfect, a healthy, beautiful baby boy with Thomas's dark hair and my green eyes, and lungs strong enough to announce his presence to the entire maternity ward. The first few years of David's life were the happiest of my marriage. Thomas was a devoted father who came home from work eager to play with his son, read bedtime stories, and teach David to throw a baseball in our backyard. I had transitioned to part-time work so I could be home with David, and our little family felt complete and secure. But when David was 4 years old, Thomas started talking about those old dreams again. The traveling, the adventure, the feeling that he was meant for something bigger than suburban Ohio. At first, I thought it was just restlessness that would pass. Thomas had always been ambitious, always looking for the next opportunity, and I assumed he was just going through a phase that many young fathers experience when they feel overwhelmed by responsibility. I was wrong. Thomas started staying late at work more frequently, going on longer business trips, and talking about opportunities in other cities. He began complaining that he felt trapped, that marriage and fatherhood had happened too quickly, that he'd never had a chance to really explore what he wanted from life. The fight started slowly, small disagreements about money, about time. Spent at home, about future plans that seemed to diverge more each month. Thomas wanted freedom. I wanted stability. Thomas wanted adventure. I wanted security for our son. Thomas wanted to explore possibilities. I wanted to build on what we'd already created. The end came suddenly, on a Tuesday morning in March when David was 5 years old. I woke up to find a note on the kitchen table and Thomas's wedding ring next to the coffee pot. The note was brief and devastating. "Margaret, I can't do this anymore. I'm not cut out for this kind of life. You and David deserve better than a man who feels like he's suffocating. I'm sorry." He'd taken his clothes, his car, and most of our savings account. He'd left behind a 5-year-old boy who kept asking, when Daddy was coming home, a mortgage I couldn't afford on my part-time salary, and a woman who had to figure out how to rebuild her entire life around the ruins of her shattered dreams. I never saw Thomas again. He called twice in the first month, awkward conversations where he asked about David, but couldn't seem to find words for the enormity of what he'd done. After that, silence. No child support payments, no birthday cards, no phone calls. He simply vanished from our lives as completely as if he'd never existed. The grief was overwhelming, but David needed me to function. So I functioned. I took a full-time job at Henderson Insurance Company, found a babysitter for after-school care, and learned to manage a household budget that never seemed to stretch far enough. I attended parent-teacher conferences alone, cheered at little, league games from the bleachers by myself, and tucked David into bed every night while he asked questions about his father that I couldn't answer. David was a resilient child who adapted to our new reality with the kind of strength that children possess when they have no choice. He stopped asking about Thomas after the first year, learned to help with household chores without being asked, and became the kind of serious, responsible little boy that single mothers depend on more than they should. I threw myself into being the best mother I could be, determined that David would never feel the absence of his father as a limitation on his potential. I worked overtime to pay for baseball uniforms and school trips. I learned to throw a football in our backyard and helped with math homework at the kitchen table. I volunteered for every school event and made sure David knew he was loved, valued, and capable of achieving anything he set his mind to. The years passed in a blur of school activities, work responsibilities, and the gradual building of a life that was different from what I'd planned, but meaningful in its own way. David thrived. Academically and socially, earning good grades and making friends easily, he was accepted to Ohio State University with a partial scholarship, and I was so proud I cried during his high school graduation speech. When David graduated from college with a degree in marketing and got a job with a respected advertising agency in Columbus, I felt like all the sacrifices had been worth it. He was successful, confident, and ready to build the kind of stable life that his father had run away from. Most importantly, he seemed to understand and appreciate the effort it had taken to raise him alone. When David married Amanda Chen in Tuttichi, a beautiful ceremony at the Marriott downtown, I was thrilled. Amanda was intelligent, professionally successful, and seemed to make David happy in a way that reminded me of the early days of my marriage to Thomas. She had an MBA from Ohio State, worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized consulting firm, and came from a family that owned several successful restaurants in the Columbus area. The wedding was elegant, 200 guests, flowers that cost more than I'd spent on my entire wedding, and a reception that was featured in Columbus Monthly magazine. I was proud to be the mother of the groom, grateful that David had found someone who would love and support him, and optimistic that Amanda would appreciate the close relationship David and I had always maintained. I should have paid more attention to the seating arrangements. Amanda's side of the venue was packed with family, college friends, business associates, and social connections that seemed to span half of Columbus. David's side had me, a few college friends, some co-workers, and several rows that remained conspicuously empty. A visual reminder that David came from a smaller, less connected world than his bride. I should have noticed that during the reception, Amanda's mother, Linda, introduced me to people as David's mother, the insurance worker, while she introduced her own family and friends with elaborate descriptions of their professional achievements and social prominence. When Amanda talked about their future plans, those plans never included considerations for aging parents or family obligations beyond the nuclear family they intended to create. But I was happy for David, grateful that he'd found love, and hopeful that Amanda would grow to appreciate the strong bond that David and I had developed during our years as a team of two against the world. The first year of their marriage seemed to confirm my optimism. Amanda was polite and friendly, including me in holiday celebrations and birthday dinners. When the twins, Emma and Lily, were born 2 years later, Amanda seemed genuinely grateful for my help during those overwhelming first months with newborn twins. I spent countless hours at their house, rocking babies during those long nights when colic and sleep deprivation made every day feel impossible. I prepared meals for the exhausted new parents, did loads of laundry so Amanda could focus on bonding with her daughters, and provided the kind of practical support that makes new parenthood manageable. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Margaret," Amanda used to say as I folded tiny pink outfits and prepared bottles for the next feeding. "You're a godsend, the kind of mother-in-law every woman dreams of having." For the first 2 years after the twins were born, I felt genuinely needed and appreciated. David would call me when the babies were sick, asking for advice based on my experience raising him. Amanda would text me photos of the girls' first smiles, first steps, first words. I was invited to family decisions and included in discussions about childcare arrangements and weekend plans. But somewhere along the way, my helpfulness transformed from appreciated support to expected service. The thank yous became less frequent. The requests for help became assumptions that I would help. The invitations to family discussions became notifications about decisions that had already been made. When Amanda returned to work after her maternity leave, I became the primary backup childcare when the girls were sick or when their regular babysitter wasn't available. What started as occasional emergency help gradually became a regular expectation that I would rearrange my own schedule whenever their childcare plans fell through. "Margaret, I hate to ask," Amanda would say, though her tone suggested she didn't actually hate asking. "But Emma has a fever and can't go to daycare. Could you possibly watch her today? I have a client presentation that I absolutely can't reschedule." These requests were always presented as emergencies, as situations beyond anyone's control that required my immediate assistance. But I began to notice that Amanda's unreschedulable commitments often turned out to be routine meetings that could have been handled differently with advanced planning. I never complained when Amanda called at 7 a.m. asking if I could drive to Columbus to watch a sick child. I never pointed out that my own plans, volunteer work at the local library, coffee dates with friends, doctor appointments, were consistently interrupted to accommodate their scheduling conflicts. I never mentioned that my offers to help had gradually transformed into assumptions that I would help, regardless of my own needs or preferences. I told myself that this was what grandmothers did, that being needed by my family was a blessing, even when the need felt more like exploitation. That the joy of watching Emma and Lily grow up was worth the gradual erosion of my own autonomy and social life. Told myself a lot of things that turned out to be lies I was telling myself to avoid confronting an uncomfortable truth about my situation. The truth was that I'd become the family's unpaid, on-call childcare service, available whenever convenient and invisible when my presence wasn't required. The truth was that Amanda had never seen me as a person with my own needs, interests, and right to consideration. I was a resource to be managed, like the cleaning service she hired or the grocery delivery she scheduled. The truth was that David, the son I'd raised alone and supported through every challenge of his youth, had gradually adopted his wife's view of me as a convenience rather than a person worthy of consideration and respect. But I didn't fully understand these truths until the Christmas that changed everything. The Christmas when 35 years of sacrifice and 3 years of convenient availability collided with holiday travel plans and a family that had forgotten I was human enough to deserve basic consideration during the season that's supposed to be about love and togetherness. The first sign that this Christmas would be different came in early November, when Amanda mentioned that they were thinking about spending the holidays with her family at their cabin in northern Michigan. "It's such a beautiful place," Amanda said as we watched Emma and Lily play in their backyard. "Right on the lake, with enough room for everyone to spread out and really relax. The girls would love it. There's sledding and ice skating, and Amanda's parents always do such elaborate Christmas morning celebrations." I smiled and nodded, assuming that everyone included me. I'd spent the past 3 Christmases with David's family, and it had become our tradition to exchange gifts on Christmas morning and share a big family dinner. The thought of the twins experiencing their first real Christmas memory at a beautiful lakeside cabin sounded wonderful. "That sounds lovely," I said. "When are you planning to leave?" Amanda's expression shifted slightly, and I saw her exchange a glance with David that I couldn't quite interpret. "Well, that's actually something we need to talk about," she said, carefully. "The cabin isn't huge, and with my parents, my sister's family, and us, it's going to be pretty crowded. My parents are getting older, and they've mentioned that having too many people might be overwhelming for them." I waited for her to continue, already sensing where this conversation was heading but hoping I was wrong. "We were thinking," David said, joining the conversation with the kind of forced casualness that indicated they'd already discussed this extensively, "that maybe this year you could spend Christmas at your own house. You know, have a quiet holiday, maybe invite some of your friends from church. Then we could celebrate together when we get back, maybe have a second Christmas dinner. A quiet holiday. At my own house, while my son and granddaughters created memories at a lakeside cabin that apparently didn't have room for the woman who'd spent 3 years serving as their backup childcare and emergency support system." "I see," I said, because I didn't trust myself to say anything else without revealing how much this casual exclusion hurt. "It's not that we don't want you there," Amanda added quickly, though her tone suggested she was more concerned about appearing reasonable than about my feelings. "It's just that my family has been planning this for months, and the logistics are complicated with so many people." Logistics. My inclusion in Christmas plans had become a logistical problem to be solved rather than a family relationship to be honored. "Of course," I said, because what else could I say? That I'd been looking forward to watching Emma and Lily open presents on Christmas morning. That I'd already bought gifts and planned contributions to Christmas dinner. That being excluded from family Christmas felt like a rejection of everything I'd contributed to their lives. "We'll definitely make it up to you," David said, giving me the kind of smile that suggested this conversation was concluding satisfactorily. "Maybe we can plan a special New Year's celebration or take a trip together in the spring." Special New Year's celebration. Another vague future promise that would be forgotten once the immediate awkwardness of excluding me from Christmas had passed. I spent the next few weeks telling myself that I was overreacting, that it was natural for young families to want to experience holidays with different relatives, that I should be happy David had found such a close-knit extended family to join, that one Christmas apart wouldn't matter in the long run. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in how Amanda and David saw me and my place in their family. I wasn't someone whose presence was desired at holiday celebrations. I was someone whose absence was convenient when other priorities took precedence. In early December, Amanda called with an update about their Christmas plans that made the situation even more hurtful. "Margaret, I just wanted to let you know that our Christmas trip got extended," she said in the bright, cheerful tone she used when delivering news she expected me to accept without complaint. "David's work is giving him extra vacation days, and my parents invited us to stay through New Year's. Isn't that wonderful? The girls will get to experience a real winter wonderland Christmas. A real winter wonderland Christmas, as opposed to the apparently inferior Christmas experience they would have had if they'd included me in their plans." "That sounds lovely," I said, though I was beginning to recognize that my automatic agreeableness was enabling Amanda's casual dismissal of my feelings. "I'm sure Emma and Lily will love it." "They're so excited," Amanda continued. "Emma keeps talking about making snow angels, and Lily wants to try ice fishing with David's grandfather-in-law. It's going to be such a magical time for them." Magical time. That Amanda felt comfortable describing their family Christmas in such glowing terms, while explaining why I wouldn't be part of it, revealed a lot about how she viewed my emotional needs and family connections. After hanging up, I sat in my quiet house and tried to process what it meant to spend Christmas and New Year's completely alone while my son and granddaughters created magical memories without me. It wasn't just about missing one holiday. It was about being treated as optional when I'd made them essential to my life for the past 3 years. I'd restructured my social life around their needs, prioritized their emergencies over my own plans, and made myself available whenever they needed support. But when it came time for the most important family celebration of the year, my presence was seen as a complication rather than a contribution. 2 weeks before Christmas, Amanda called with what she described as exciting news that would change everything about my holiday plans, though not in the way she intended. "Margaret, I have the most wonderful surprise," she said, her voice bubbling with the kind of enthusiasm that immediately made me suspicious. "David and I have been talking, and we realized how unfair it is for you to spend Christmas alone while we're in Michigan." My heart lifted for a moment, thinking they'd decided to include me in their family trip after all. "So we've come up with a solution," Amanda continued. "We're going to take you with us part way. We can drop you off at a lovely motel near the cabin, maybe 20 minutes away, and you can spend Christmas in a beautiful area while still being close to family. Then you can drive home in our second car whenever you're ready." Drive home in their second car. They were planning to strand me at a motel near their family celebration, giving me access to transportation, but not to the actual holiday gathering I'd been excluded from. "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to understand all too clearly. "You want me to spend Christmas alone in a motel?" "Not alone," Amanda said quickly. "You'll be close to us, and the area is beautiful. Lots of little towns with charming shops and restaurants. It could be like a little vacation for you. A chance to explore somewhere new and have some time to yourself." Time to myself. During Christmas. At a motel. While my family celebrated 20 minutes away without me. "Amanda," I said carefully, "are you suggesting that I pay for a motel room so I can spend Christmas by myself near your family gathering?" "Well, we'd help with the cost," Amanda said, as if the financial aspect was the primary concern. "And like I said, you'd have our second car, so you could drive around and explore. Maybe visit some of the local attractions." Local attractions. On Christmas Day. While my 6-year-old granddaughters opened presents and created memories that I would hear about secondhand, the audacity of the suggestion was breathtaking. Amanda was presenting exile to a motel as a generous compromise, as if being allowed to spend Christmas alone 20 minutes away from my family was somehow better than spending Christmas alone in my own house 40 minutes away. But what bothered me more than the suggestion itself was the casual way Amanda presented it. as if my feelings about spending Christmas in isolation were irrelevant as long as the logistics worked for everyone else. "Let me think about it," I said, because I needed time to process the magnitude of what Amanda was actually asking me to accept. "Of course," Amanda said brightly, "but don't think too long. Christmas is only 2 weeks away, and we'll need to make hotel reservations soon." Hotel reservations. For the motel where I'd spend Christmas alone while they celebrated with family, who apparently mattered more than I did. After that phone call, I spent several days trying to understand how I'd become someone whose presence at Christmas was seen as so optional that exile to a motel could be presented as a reasonable solution. How had 35 years of devoted motherhood and 3 years of reliable support resulted in a relationship where my emotional needs were so completely irrelevant? But I agreed to their plan because I couldn't bear the thought of spending Christmas completely alone in my house while my granddaughters were just 40 minutes away. At least at the motel, I'd be geographically close to Emma and Lily, even if I couldn't be with them. At least I'd be close enough that if they needed me, if someone got sick or if childcare plans fell through, I could help. At least I'd be available, which had become my primary value to this family. I had no idea that agreeing to spend Christmas at a motel would become the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. I had no idea that being abandoned in a parking lot on Christmas Eve would finally teach me the difference between being convenient and being valued, between being available and being respected. I had no idea that the worst Christmas of my life would become the beginning of the best chapter of my life, when I finally learned to stop settling for scraps and started demanding the respect I deserved. The road to that motel in northern Michigan would teach me that sometimes the people who claim to love you need to lose you completely before they can learn to value you properly. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who have forgotten how to appreciate what they have. Before we continue with Margaret's story, I want you to really think about this for a moment. How many of you watching this have found yourselves in Margaret's position? Maybe not with a Christmas motel, but in that place where you realize you've been giving and giving and giving, and the people you're giving to have started treating your generosity like it's their right instead of your choice? Drop a comment below and tell me. When was the moment you realized you were being taken for granted? Was it a holiday gathering where you weren't included? A family emergency where no one thought to check on you? A celebration where your contributions were forgotten but your absence would have been noticed? Because Margaret's story isn't just about one Christmas Eve in a motel parking lot. It's about what happens when kind, generous people finally reach their breaking point and discover they have more power than anyone realized. And here's what I want you to understand as we dive deeper into this story. Margaret thought she was powerless. She thought she was dependent on David and Amanda's approval, that she needed their invitation to feel valued, that her worth was measured by how useful she could be to them. But she was about to discover that the people who had been treating her like she was dispensable were about to learn that they had just thrown away the most valuable relationship in their lives. So make sure you're subscribed, because this story is going to show you exactly how to flip the script when people have forgotten your worth. This is about more than revenge. This is about reclaiming your power and teaching people that respect isn't optional, it's required. Now, let's get back to Margaret's story and the weeks leading up to that Christmas Eve that would change everything. Chapter 2 weeks between Amanda's wonderful surprise phone call and Christmas Eve passed in a strange blur of preparation and growing dread. I found myself going through the motions of getting ready for what Amanda was calling our family Christmas adventure, while struggling with the reality that this adventure involved me spending the holidays alone in a motel room. I bought gifts for Emma and Lily, a set of matching wooden dollhouses that I'd spent weeks painting and decorating by hand, complete with tiny furniture and miniature families. I'd imagined watching their faces light up as they opened them on Christmas morning, helping them arrange the furniture and playing house together. Instead, I wrapped them carefully and loaded them into David's trunk, knowing I'd hand them over in a motel parking lot and drive away before the girls could truly enjoy them. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was spending my own money on Christmas gifts that I wouldn't be present to see opened, for children whose Christmas joy I was being excluded from experiencing. "The girls are going to love those dollhouses," David said as he loaded them into his car the morning we left for Michigan. "You always find the most thoughtful gifts, Mom. The most thoughtful gifts." From the grandmother who apparently wasn't thoughtful enough to include in actual Christmas celebrations. "I just hope they have room to play with them at the cabin," I said, testing whether David had any awareness of the irony in this situation. "Oh, they'll find room," David said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the fact that his daughters would have room to play with their grandmother's gifts, but their grandmother wouldn't have room to watch them enjoy those gifts. The drive to northern Michigan took 6 hours, and I spent most of it in the backseat of David's SUV, listening to Amanda and David discuss their plans for the week ahead. They talked about Christmas Eve dinner with Amanda's extended family, Christmas morning gift exchanges, sledding parties with the cousins, and New Year's Eve celebrations that sounded magical and wonderful and completely separate from anything I would experience. "Emma's going to love ice fishing with Grandpa Chen," Amanda said, scrolling through her phone to show David photos of previous holiday gatherings at the family cabin. "And Lily will probably spend the whole time in the kitchen, with Grandma Chen learning to make dumplings." Grandpa Chen and Grandma Chen. The twins had 3 living grandparents, but apparently only 2 of them were important enough to create holiday memories with. "What about the Christmas pageant?" David asked. "Didn't your mom say something about the kids putting on a show?" "Oh, yes!" Amanda's voice lit up with excitement. "It's this adorable tradition where all the grandchildren perform songs and poems for the adults. Emma and Lily have been practicing a duet. It's going to be so precious." A Christmas pageant. My granddaughters would be performing in a family Christmas pageant that I would not be invited to attend, creating memories with grandparents who would be there to applaud and take photos and make them feel special. Stared out the window at the increasingly snowy landscape and tried to understand how I'd become someone whose exclusion from my granddaughter's childhood milestones could be discussed so casually in my presence. As we drove deeper into Michigan, the conversation turned to logistics that revealed just how much planning had gone into this family gathering that didn't include me. "Did your mom get the sleds out of storage?" David asked. "Yes, and Dad got the ice skating rink cleared off," Amanda replied. "He's so excited to teach the girls how to skate. He's been talking about it for weeks." "What about Christmas morning? Is your sister bringing her special French toast?" "Of course, and Mom's making her famous Christmas breakfast casserole. With all the kids there, it's going to be such a production. In the best possible way. All the kids. Except the grandmother who had spent years making sure those kids had everything they needed whenever their parents were too busy to provide it themselves. I can't wait for the girls to experience a real family Christmas," Amanda continued. "You know, with all the traditions and relatives and chaos, it's going to be so different from our quiet Christmases in Columbus. A real family Christmas, as opposed to the apparently inferior Christmases we'd shared for the past 3 years, where I'd helped create traditions and memories that Amanda now seemed to consider inadequate preparation for this superior family experience. The girls are going to remember this Christmas for the rest of their lives, David added, and I could hear the genuine excitement in his voice as he anticipated watching his daughters experience what he clearly saw as the ultimate holiday celebration. Bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that the girls would also remember this as the Christmas when Grandma Margaret wasn't important enough to be included in the family gathering. That they'd eventually realize their grandmother had been banished to a motel while everyone else celebrated together. The first glimpse of beautiful Lake Lodge, the motel where I'd be spending Christmas, came as we drove through the small town of Pine Harbor, Michigan. It was a modest, older establishment with a neon sign that flickered between vacancy and no vacancy, surrounded by a parking lot that needed repaving and a small office that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. "This looks quaint," David said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that suggested he was seeing the motel through fresh eyes and realizing it might not be as lovely as Amanda had described. "It has charm," Amanda said firmly, though I noticed she didn't get out to look at the accommodations more closely. "And it's supposed to have a beautiful view of the lake." The beautiful view of the lake was visible through a gap between two other buildings, a sliver of gray water that looked cold and unwelcoming under the overcast December sky. David parked in front of the motel office, and we all got out to check on availability and room rates. The lobby smelled like old carpet and pine air freshener, and the teenage clerk behind the desk looked surprised to see customers on December 23rd. "You folks looking for a room?" he asked, glancing between the three of us as if trying to figure out our relationship dynamics. "Just for one person," Amanda said brightly. "My mother-in-law is planning to spend Christmas in your beautiful area. How much for your best room with a lake view?" Your beautiful area. Amanda was describing Pine Harbor as if it were a destination, a resort, rather than a small town with a struggling tourism economy, and a motel that clearly catered to stranded travelers rather than holiday vacationers. "Lakeview rooms are $79 a night," the clerk said, pulling out a registration form. "How many nights?" Amanda looked at me expectantly, as if the length of my exile was my decision to make. "I'm not sure yet," I said, because I honestly didn't know how long I was supposed to stay in this motel while my family celebrated Christmas without me. "Maybe through the weekend?" "We can always extend if you decide you want to stay longer," David said, as if extending my time in a motel room would be a pleasant vacation option rather than prolonged isolation from family. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a $79 a night motel in small-town Michigan in December. A double bed with a faded floral bedspread, a small table with two mismatched chairs, a television that got fuzzy reception on most channels, and a view of the lake that was partially blocked by a dumpster and the motel's maintenance shed. The heating unit under the window rattled and wheezed, producing lukewarm air that didn't quite chase away the chill that seemed to penetrate the walls. The bathroom was clean but dated, with thin towels and soap dispensers that had been refilled so many times the labels were worn off. "This will be perfect for you, Mom," David said, testing the bed and adjusting the thermostat as if these small gestures could transform the room into acceptable accommodation for his mother's Christmas stay. "Nice and quiet, great for relaxing." On Christmas, alone in a motel room while my family celebrated 20 minutes away. "And you have our phone numbers," Amanda added, pulling out her phone to double-check our contact information. "If you need anything, just call. We're really not that far away." Not that far away. Close enough to call if I needed something, but apparently too far away to include me in Christmas celebrations. We unloaded my suitcase and the gifts I'd brought for the twins, and I watched David and Amanda prepare to drive away to their family gathering. David hugged me goodbye with the kind of embrace that suggested he was genuinely fond of me, but hadn't really thought through what it meant to leave me alone in a motel on December 23rd. "You're going to have a nice, peaceful Christmas," he said, as if peace was what I'd been hoping for rather than connection with my family. "And we'll call you Christmas morning so the girls can thank you for their gifts," Amanda added, as if a phone call would substitute for being present to see their excitement firsthand. I stood in the motel parking lot and watched their SUV disappear, down the snowy road toward Amanda's family cabin, carrying my son and granddaughters to a celebration that didn't include me. The silence that followed was profound, not the peaceful quiet of a restful vacation, but the hollow silence of abandonment. I went back into my motel room and tried to make it feel less temporary. I hung up my clothes in the small closet, arranged my toiletries in the bathroom, and plugged in my phone charger. I turned on the television and flipped through channels, looking for something that might distract me from the reality of where I was and why I was there. Christmas movie was playing on one channel, "It's a Wonderful Life." And I watched for a few minutes before realizing that stories about the importance of family and community were exactly what I didn't need to see while sitting alone in a motel room on Christmas Eve. I changed the channel to a cooking show, then to the news, then to a nature documentary about penguins. Nothing felt right. Nothing could distract me from the fundamental wrongness of my situation. At 6 p.m., I called David to let them know I'd settled in safely and to wish Emma and Lily good night. Amanda answered the phone, and I could hear the sounds of a large family, gathering in the background, children laughing, adults talking, Christmas music playing, the kind of warm family chaos that I was experiencing secondhand through a phone call. "Margaret, how's your room? Are you all settled in?" "The room is fine," I said, because there was no point in complaining about accommodations I'd agreed to accept. "How are the girls doing?" "They're having such a wonderful time," Amanda said, and I could hear genuine happiness in her voice as she described the evening they were having. "They've been sledding with their cousins, and now they're helping Grandma Chen make cookies for Santa. Emma keeps asking when they get to put out milk and cookies, and Lily is so excited about the presents under the tree." Grandma Chen, the grandmother who was present for cookie making and Christmas preparations, unlike the grandmother who was listening to these activities from a motel room 20 minutes away. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Could I say goodnight? To them?" "Of course! Girls, come say goodnight to Grandma Margaret." I heard footsteps and giggling as Emma and Lily were brought to the phone. "Grandma Margaret!" Emma's voice was bright with excitement. "We're making cookies! Grandma Chen showed us how to make them look like snowmen, and mine has chocolate chip buttons." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful despite the pain of hearing about activities I should have been part of. "Are you being good helpers?" "We're the best helpers," Lily chimed in. "And Grandpa Chen said tomorrow we get to help him make pancakes that look like Christmas trees, with green food coloring. Christmas tree pancakes with Grandpa Chen, another tradition my granddaughters would experience with grandparents who were present, while the grandmother who had spent 3 years being their backup caregiver listened from exile." "That sounds amazing," I said. "I can't wait to hear all about it." "Grandma Margaret," Emma said, her voice taking on the serious tone she used for important questions. "Why aren't you here with us? Mommy said you wanted to stay at a hotel, but wouldn't it be more fun to be here?" Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had identified the fundamental problem with this arrangement that all the adults had been pretending didn't exist. "Well, sweetheart," I said carefully, "sometimes grown-ups have to make complicated decisions about holiday plans." "But we miss you," Lily added. "It doesn't feel like Christmas without you here. It doesn't feel like Christmas without you here." My 6-year-old granddaughter had articulated what the adults in her family had apparently been unable to understand. That family celebrations feel incomplete when family members are excluded. "I miss you too, girls," I said, and I had to work to keep my voice steady. "But I want you to have the most wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you soon." Amanda took the phone back, and I could hear her ushering the girls back to their cookie-making activities. "They're fine," she said, as if their questions about my absence were minor concerns that would be quickly forgotten. "Kids adapt so easily. They'll be too busy with all the activities to really miss anyone." Too busy to really miss anyone. Amanda was suggesting that my granddaughter's natural desire to include me in Christmas was just temporary sentiment that would be overwhelmed by the excitement of other activities. "I'm sure they'll have a wonderful time," I said, because I didn't trust myself to respond to Amanda's casual dismissal of the girls' feelings about my absence. "We all will," Amanda said. "And Margaret, try to enjoy your quiet Christmas. Maybe explore some of the local shops tomorrow or find a nice restaurant for Christmas dinner. There might be other people around who are also traveling for the holidays." Other people who are also traveling for the holidays. Amanda was suggesting that I seek out the company of strangers rather than acknowledging that I should be spending Christmas with my own family. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and tried to process the conversation. My granddaughters missed me and didn't understand why I wasn't with them. But their mother was confident that they'd get over it, that the excitement of Christmas with her family would make my absence irrelevant. The assumption that children adapt easily to family members being excluded revealed a lot about how Amanda viewed family relationships. She seemed to believe that love and connection were easily replaceable, that new experiences could substitute for missing relationships, that children's emotional needs were simple enough to be managed through distraction and entertainment. Ordered dinner from the only restaurant in Pine Harbor that was open on December 23rd, a pizza place that delivered to the motel. The pizza was mediocre, and I ate it alone while watching the local news and trying not to think about the family dinner that was happening 20 minutes away without me. At 9 p.m., I called my friend Helen back in Millfield, needing to talk to someone who might understand what I was going through. "Margaret?" Helen's voice was warm with surprise. "How's your Christmas trip going? Are you having a wonderful time in Michigan?" I'd told Helen about the Christmas plans, but I hadn't mentioned the motel situation. I'd been too embarrassed to admit that my own family had found my presence inconvenient enough to exile me to a hotel room. "Helen," I said, and my voice broke a little as I tried to explain the situation. "I'm spending Christmas alone in a motel room while David and Amanda are with her family." The silence that followed was profound. "Margaret," Helen said finally, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Did you just say you're spending Christmas alone in a motel?" "It's complicated," I said, launching into the explanation I'd been practicing in my head. "Amanda's family cabin doesn't have enough room for everyone, and they thought I might enjoy having some time to myself to explore the area." "Margaret Sullivan," Helen said in the tone she'd used when we worked together at the library, and she needed to cut through nonsense to get to the truth. "Are you telling me that your son and daughter-in-law brought you to Michigan and left you in a motel while they celebrate Christmas with her family?" Hearing Helen state the situation so plainly made me realize how thoroughly I'd been gaslighting myself about the acceptability of this arrangement. "When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is," I said weakly. "Margaret, it sounds exactly as bad as it is," Helen said, her voice rising with indignation. "They didn't bring you to Michigan for a nice Christmas vacation. They brought you along so they could dump you somewhere convenient while they had the Christmas they actually wanted. Without you." The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because they were true, and partly because hearing someone else state the reality so clearly made it impossible to continue pretending this was anything other than abandonment. "I agreed to it," I said, as if my consent made the situation less hurtful. "Margaret, why did you agree to spend Christmas alone in a motel room?" It was a simple question, but I realized I didn't have a good answer. Why had I agreed to this? Why had I accepted exile rather than insisting on inclusion or simply staying home? "I wanted to be close to Emma and Lily," I said finally. "I thought, maybe if they needed me or if there was an emergency." "You wanted to be close enough to help if they needed you, but not close enough to enjoy Christmas with them," Helen said, and I could hear her processing the implications of what I'd told her. "Margaret, do you realize what this arrangement actually is?" "What do you mean?" "It means they wanted you available as backup support in case something went wrong, but they didn't want your presence complicating their perfect family Christmas. They wanted the security of having you nearby without the inconvenience of including you in their celebration. The security of having me nearby without the inconvenience of including me in their celebration." Helen had articulated something I'd been struggling to understand about this entire arrangement. "They probably told Amanda's family that they couldn't come if they had to bring David's mother," Helen continued, her voice getting more heated as she worked through the logic of the situation. "So they came up with this solution that let them have the Christmas they wanted while making sure you were still available if they needed anything." I sat in silence, staring at the faded floral bedspread and processing what Helen was telling me. The motel wasn't a compromise or a vacation opportunity. It was a holding pattern that allowed David and Amanda to have their ideal Christmas while keeping me accessible for emergency support. "Margaret," Helen said gently, "how long are you planning to stay in this motel?" "I don't know," I admitted. Amanda suggested I could explore the area, maybe find some local restaurants, stay as long as I wanted. "And how does that make you feel? How did it make me feel?" I'd been so focused on being agreeable, on not causing problems, on accepting whatever arrangement my family offered, that I hadn't really allowed myself to feel anything about the situation. "Lonely," I said finally. "It makes me feel very lonely." "Margaret, you're spending Christmas alone in a motel room while your family celebrates 20 minutes away. Of course you feel lonely. That's not a character flaw. That's a natural human response to being excluded from family celebrations." We talked for another hour, and Helen helped me understand that what was happening to me wasn't normal family compromise. It was abandonment disguised as consideration. By the time we hung up, I was beginning to see my situation more clearly. Went to bed that night in the narrow motel bed, listening to the heating unit rattle and the sound of cars passing on the highway, and tried to imagine what Christmas morning would be like. I pictured Emma and Lily waking up in the cabin, running to see what Santa had brought them, surrounded by cousins and grandparents and the warm chaos of a large family Christmas. And I pictured myself waking up alone in this motel room, maybe calling to hear about their excitement secondhand, maybe driving around Pine Harbor looking for something to do on Christmas Day. For the first time since this whole arrangement had been proposed, I allowed myself to really feel how wrong this was. How unacceptable it was to be treated as someone whose presence at family Christmas was optional. How devastating it was to realize that the people I'd spent 3 years serving had decided I wasn't important enough to include in the most meaningful celebration of the year. But I still didn't fully understand what was coming. I still thought, this was just a painful Christmas that I'd get through by being strong and accommodating, and that everything would go back to normal when we returned to Ohio. I had no idea that tomorrow, Christmas Eve, would bring a moment of abandonment so complete and cruel that it would finally break through my decades of people-pleasing and show me exactly who I was dealing with. I had no idea that by Christmas night, I'd finally understand the difference between being loving and being a doormat, between being family and being convenient, between being valued and being used. The breaking point was coming, and it would change everything. Christmas Eve morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of overcast sky that made the world look muted and lifeless. I woke up in the narrow motel bed at 6:30 a.m., disoriented for a moment before remembering where I was and why I was there. The heating unit was still rattling, and I could see my breath in the chilly air that the inadequate heating system couldn't quite warm. Through the thin walls, I could hear other motel guests, a truck driver talking loudly on his phone about delivery schedules, a family with young children who seemed to be dealing with some kind of travel emergency. These were people who were stuck at beautiful Lake Lodge by necessity, not choice. People whose Christmas plans had been disrupted by circumstances beyond their control, unlike me, whose Christmas plans had been disrupted by family members who simply found my presence inconvenient. I made coffee using the small coffee maker in the room, trying not to think about the Christmas Eve morning I should have been having. In my ideal scenario, I would have been at David's house, helping Emma and Lily make Christmas cookies, watching Christmas movies, maybe helping with last-minute gift wrapping. Or better yet, I would have been at the cabin with everyone else, part of the warm family chaos that Amanda had described so enthusiastically. Instead, I sat alone in a motel room, drinking weak coffee and wondering what I was supposed to do with myself on Christmas Eve in a small Michigan town where I knew no one and had no purpose. At 8 a.m., I called David to check in and wish everyone a Merry Christmas Eve. Amanda answered the phone, and the background noise immediately transported me to the family gathering I was missing. Children's voices, Christmas music, the sounds of breakfast, preparation and holiday excitement. "Margaret, Merry Christmas Eve. How did you sleep?" "Fine," I said, though I'd actually tossed and turned most of the night, listening to unfamiliar sounds and trying to get comfortable in a bed that smelled like industrial laundry detergent. "How is everyone this morning?" "Oh, we're having such a wonderful time," Amanda said, her voice bubbling with genuine enthusiasm. "The girls woke up at 6 because they were so excited, and they've been helping with breakfast preparations. Emma cracked eggs for the first time, and Lily helped mix pancake batter. David's out with his father-in-law getting firewood for tonight's Christmas Eve bonfire." Christmas Eve bonfire. Another tradition my granddaughters would experience without me. Another memory being created by the family that didn't include their grandmother. "That sounds lovely," I said. Because what else could I say? That I wished I was there helping Emma crack eggs and watching Lily mix batter? That I was sitting alone in a motel room while they created magical Christmas memories? And, "Tonight is going to be so special," Amanda continued. "We're having the traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Prime rib, all the sides, and then the children's Christmas pageant I told you about. Emma and Lily have been practicing their duet all week. The children's Christmas pageant, my granddaughters, would be performing for an audience of loving family members who would applaud and take photos and make them feel celebrated, while their other grandmother listened to descriptions from a motel room. Could I say good morning to the girls?" I asked. "They're actually outside building a snowman with their cousins right now," Amanda said. "But I'll tell them you called. They'll be so excited to hear from you. They'll be so excited to hear from you." But apparently not excited enough to interrupt their snowman building to actually talk to me. "Amanda," I said, gathering my courage to ask the question that had been bothering me since yesterday. "What time should I expect you to pick me up for Christmas dinner tomorrow?" There was a pause on the other end of the line that lasted just long enough to make my stomach drop. "Oh, Margaret," Amanda said, her voice taking on the careful tone she used when delivering news she expected me to accept without complaint. "I thought we'd discuss this. Christmas dinner is going to be very crowded with all of my family here. The dining room barely seats everyone as it is." "I don't understand," I said, though I was beginning to understand all too clearly. "Are you saying I'm not invited to Christmas dinner?" "It's not that you're not invited," Amanda said quickly. "It's just that the logistics are complicated. My parents planned this dinner for their immediate family, and adding another person would really strain the seating and food preparation." Another person. I wasn't Margaret, David's mother and Emma and Lily's grandmother. I was another person, whose presence would strain the logistics of a family dinner. "But I brought gifts for the girls," I said, grasping for some reason why my inclusion might be reconsidered. "Don't you think they'd want me there when they open them?" "Oh, we can handle the gifts," Amanda said brightly. "David can bring them to the cabin, and we'll make sure the girls know they're from you. We can even take photos of them opening your presents and send them to you." Photos of them opening my presents. I would experience my granddaughter's Christmas joy through photographs sent to my phone while I sat alone in a motel room. "So I'm spending Christmas Day alone as well?" I asked, needing to understand the full scope of my exclusion. "Margaret, you're in a beautiful area with lots of charming towns to explore," Amanda said, as if sightseeing alone on Christmas Day was a reasonable substitute for spending the holiday with family. "Maybe you could find a nice restaurant for Christmas dinner, or drive around and see the holiday decorations. Make it a special day for yourself. Make it a special day for yourself, while your family celebrates the most important holiday of the year without you." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and tried to process what I'd just learned. Not only was I spending Christmas Eve alone, but I was also spending Christmas Day alone. The family gathering that had been too crowded to include me apparently extended through the entire holiday. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a temporary inconvenience or a one-day exclusion. I had been systematically removed from my family's Christmas celebration, relegated to observer status while everyone else participated in traditions and memories that would bond them together in ways that didn't include me. At 10 a.m., I decided to take Amanda's suggestion and explore Pine Harbor, partly because sitting in the motel room was becoming unbearable, and partly because I needed to understand what kind of beautiful area I'd been encouraged to experience instead of spending Christmas with my family. Pine Harbor was a small town that had clearly seen better days. Main Street was lined with shops that catered to summer tourists, ice cream parlors, souvenir stores, and casual restaurants that were mostly closed in December. The few businesses that were open looked like they were struggling to maintain profitability during the off-season. I walked through the town's small downtown area, past a closed antique shop, a struggling bookstore, and a diner that advertised home-style cooking, but looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The sidewalks were icy and poorly maintained, and the gray December sky made everything look dreary and unwelcoming. This was the beautiful area that Amanda thought would provide an adequate substitute for Christmas with family. A dying tourist town in the dead of winter, where most businesses were closed and the few people I encountered looked like they'd rather be somewhere else. I stopped at the one coffee shop that was open and ordered a latte, hoping to warm up and maybe find some human connection in a day that was feeling increasingly isolated. The barista was a college-aged girl who looked bored and tired, probably working Christmas Eve because she needed the money. "Are you visiting for the holidays?" she asked as she made my drink, apparently grateful for any conversation that broke up the monotony of her shift. "Something like that," I said, not wanting to explain that I was visiting because my family found my presence at their holiday celebration inconvenient. "Not much going on here this time of year," she said apologetically. "Most people come in summer for the lake activities. December's pretty dead." Pretty dead. That described Pine Harbor perfectly. And it also described how Christmas Eve was feeling for a 70-year-old woman who was spending it alone while her family celebrated 20 minutes away. I spent an hour walking around town, looking in shop windows, and trying to imagine how I was supposed to fill the next 2 days in this place. By the time I returned to the motel, I was cold, depressed, and more aware than ever of how thoroughly I'd been excluded from the Christmas my family was enjoying. At noon, David called. "Mom, how's your Christmas Eve going? Amanda said you were going to explore Pine Harbor." "I did explore it," I said. "It's very quiet this time of year." "But peaceful, right?" "Sometimes quiet can be exactly what we need." Quiet. David was describing my forced isolation as if it were a spa retreat rather than abandonment. "David," I said, deciding to be direct about my situation, "Amanda told me I'm not included in Christmas dinner tomorrow either. Is that true?" There was a pause, and I could hear him having a muffled conversation with someone in the background, probably Amanda coaching him on how to handle this conversation. "Mom, the thing is, Amanda's parents planned this dinner for their family, and they're not really equipped to host additional people. The cabin dining room is pretty small." "I'm not additional people, David. I'm your mother." "Of course you are," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant. It's just that the logistics are complicated, and we thought you might prefer to have a relaxing day rather than being crowded into a small space with a bunch of people you don't know very well." I might prefer to have a relaxing day. David was suggesting that spending Christmas alone was my preference rather than their decision. "David, when you said this trip would let me be close to family during Christmas, what exactly did you mean?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, we're nearby if you need anything," he said finally. "And we can talk on the phone, and we'll definitely get together before we all drive back to Ohio. We'll definitely get together before we drive back to Ohio." A brief visit before returning home was apparently the extent of family togetherness I could expect during the Christmas season. "I see," I said, because I was finally beginning to see. Exactly what this arrangement really was. "Mom, are you upset?" David asked, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice, as if my feelings about being excluded from Christmas were unexpected. "I'm disappointed," I said carefully. "I had hoped to spend Christmas with my granddaughters." "You will spend Christmas with them," David said. "Just not exactly the way we originally planned, but we'll make it special, I promise. We'll make it special." David was promising to make my exclusion from Christmas special, as if the right attitude could transform abandonment into celebration. After we hung up, I sat in the motel room and tried to understand how I'd raised a son who could promise to make my isolation special while spending Christmas with his wife's family. How had David become someone who could express concern about my feelings while defending the arrangement that was causing those feelings? At 2 p.m., I decided to call Helen again, needing to talk to someone who might help me make sense of what was happening. "Margaret, how's Christmas Eve going?" Helen asked, her voice warm with the assumption that I was having a lovely holiday. "Helen, they're not including me in Christmas dinner either," I said without preamble. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm spending Christmas Day alone, too. Amanda says the cabin dining room is too small to include me in the family dinner." The silence that followed was profound. "Margaret," Helen said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger, "are you telling me that they brought you to Michigan to spend both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day alone in a motel?" "They say I can explore the area and find a restaurant for Christmas dinner," I said, repeating Amanda's suggestions as if saying them out loud might make them sound more reasonable. "Margaret Sullivan, listen to me very carefully," Helen said in the voice she'd used during our library days when she needed to cut through bureaucratic nonsense. "What they're doing to you is not normal. It's not acceptable. And it's not something a loving family does to a 70-year-old grandmother. But I agreed to come," I said weakly. "You agreed to come because they presented it as a way to spend Christmas near your family. They didn't tell you that you'd be spending Christmas completely alone while they celebrated without you." Helen was right, of course. When Amanda had first suggested this arrangement, she'd framed it as a compromise that would allow me to be close to family during Christmas. She hadn't mentioned that being close to family would mean listening to their celebrations through phone calls while sitting alone in a motel room. "Margaret, do you realize what this tells you about how they see you?" "What do you mean?" "It means they see you as someone whose feelings don't matter. Someone whose presence at family celebrations is not just unnecessary, but actually unwanted. Someone who can be discarded when convenient and retrieved when needed." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I couldn't argue with them. Everything about this arrangement suggested that my emotional needs were irrelevant to my family's decision-making process. "But I don't know what to do about it," I said. "I'm here, they're there, and I don't have any power to change the situation." "Margaret," Helen said gently, "you have more power than you realize. You just haven't figured out how to use it yet." We talked for another hour, and Helen helped me understand that accepting unacceptable treatment had become such a habit that I'd lost track of my own worth and agency. By the time we hung up, I was beginning to see my situation differently. Wasn't a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was a woman who had allowed herself to be treated poorly because I'd prioritized keeping peace over demanding respect. At 4 p.m., I received a group text from Amanda with photos from the cabin. Pictures of Emma and Lily playing in the snow with their cousins, building snowmen, ice skating on the cleared rink behind the cabin. Pictures of Christmas Eve dinner preparation, with multiple generations of Amanda's family working together in the kitchen. The photos were beautiful and warm and full of exactly the kind of Christmas magic that I should have been part of. But instead of sharing these moments, I was viewing them as an outsider, like someone scrolling through strangers' social media posts. One photo showed Emma and Lily helping their grandfather hang ornaments on a massive Christmas tree, their faces glowing with excitement and concentration. Another showed them sitting with their grandmother, learning to knit what looked like Christmas stockings. These were the Christmas memories my granddaughters were creating without me. moments of bonding with grandparents who were present, traditions being passed down by family members who were included in the celebration. At 6 p.m., Amanda called to check on me and share details about their Christmas Eve dinner. "Margaret, you should see how beautiful everything looks. The table is set with my mother's finest china, and we have candles and fresh flowers and the most gorgeous centerpiece. The girls are so excited they can barely sit still. The most gorgeous centerpiece." Amanda was describing the Christmas Eve dinner I was excluded from as if I would enjoy hearing about its beauty and elegance. "That sounds lovely," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "And the food smells incredible. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, my mother's famous Yorkshire pudding. The girls tried Yorkshire pudding for the first time and absolutely loved it." Yorkshire pudding. Another first experience for my granddaughters that I was missing. Another tradition they were learning from grandparents who were present to teach them. "I wish you could see how happy they are," Amanda continued. "Emma keeps talking about how this is the best Christmas ever, and Lily says she never wants to leave." The best Christmas ever. My granddaughters were having the best Christmas of their lives while their other grandmother sat alone in a motel room, excluded from the joy they were experiencing. "Could I say goodnight to them before dinner?" I asked. "Oh, they're already at the table," Amanda said. "We started a little early because the children were so excited, but I'll tell them you called, and maybe you can talk to them tomorrow." Maybe you can talk to them tomorrow. Another vague promise about phone contact that would substitute for actual presence. After hanging up, I sat in the darkening motel room and tried to process the full scope of what was happening to me. My family was having the Christmas of their dreams 20 minutes away, creating memories and traditions that would bond them together for years to come. And I was spending Christmas Eve alone, listening to descriptions of celebrations I wasn't allowed to join. At 8 p.m., the heating unit in my room stopped working. I noticed the change gradually. The room was getting colder, and the rattling noise that had been my constant companion since arriving had stopped. I checked the thermostat, tried adjusting the settings, but nothing happened. The unit was completely dead. I called the motel office, but there was no answer. I walked to the front desk, but it was closed with a sign that said, "Back in 15 minutes," a sign that looked like it had been there for hours. The temperature in the room was dropping quickly, and I could see my breath when I exhaled. I piled all the blankets from the closet onto the bed and tried to stay warm, but the Michigan winter was seeping through the poorly insulated walls. At 9 p.m., I called David to let him know about the heating situation and ask if there might be room for me at the cabin, just for the night, until the motel could fix the problem. Amanda answered the phone, and I could hear Christmas Eve celebration in the background. Laughter, Christmas music, the sounds of family enjoying each other's company. "Margaret, is everything okay?" "The heating in my room has stopped working," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my chattering teeth. I was wondering if there might be space for me at the cabin tonight, just until the motel can fix the problem. There was a pause, and I could hear Amanda having a muffled conversation with someone in the background. "Oh no, that's terrible timing," she said when she returned to the phone. "But the cabin really is completely full. Every bed is taken, and we even have people sleeping on air mattresses in the living room. Every bed is taken. There was no room at the inn, even for an emergency." "Maybe you could try another motel," Amanda suggested. "Or call a repair service?" Another motel on Christmas Eve, when I was already paying for a room at this one. Or call a repair service that probably didn't exist in Pine Harbor and definitely wouldn't come out on Christmas Eve. "Amanda," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I'm cold, I'm alone, and it's Christmas Eve. Couldn't we figure out some arrangement just for tonight? Margaret, I really wish I could help, but there's literally no space. My parents aren't equipped to handle extra people, and everyone's settled in for the night." Extra people. There it was again. I wasn't David's mother who needed help. I was extra people whose problems were inconvenient. "Maybe you could stay in David's car tonight?" Amanda suggested. It would be warmer than the motel room, and you could run the engine periodically for heat. Stay in David's car. Amanda was suggesting that I spend Christmas Eve night sleeping in a car rather than find room for me in the family cabin. But David's car was at the cabin with them. I was stranded at the motel with no transportation except… Amanda, I said slowly, how would I get to David's car? You have it at the cabin. Oh, right, she said, as if this obvious logistical problem hadn't occurred to her. Well, maybe you could call a taxi? A taxi on Christmas Eve in Pine Harbor, Michigan, to take me to a cabin where I still wouldn't be welcome inside so I could sleep in a car in their driveway. Never mind, I said. I'll figure something out. I'm sure you will, Amanda said brightly. You're so resourceful. And Margaret? Try to have a Merry Christmas Eve anyway. Try to have a Merry Christmas Eve anyway, while sitting in a freezing motel room with no heat, no family, and no way to solve the problem. That's when it happened. That's when 35 years of putting my family first, 3 years of accepting whatever treatment they offered, and 2 days of being treated like an inconvenient obligation finally crystallized into perfect blazing clarity. I was done. I was done being grateful for scraps. I was done accepting unacceptable treatment because I was afraid of causing problems. I was done making myself smaller so other people's lives could be bigger. And most of all, I was done being treated like someone whose comfort and dignity were optional considerations in my own family's decision-making. Amanda wanted me to try to have a Merry Christmas Eve in a freezing motel room. I had a better idea. I was going to give myself the Christmas gift I should have been receiving all along. The gift of standing up for myself, of demanding the respect I deserved, and of showing my family exactly what they'd lost when they decided I was disposable. The transformation was about to begin. After Amanda hung up on me, suggesting I sleep in a car on Christmas Eve while she enjoyed a warm family celebration 20 minutes away, I sat in that freezing motel room and felt something, fundamental shift inside me. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't just hurt, though the pain was almost overwhelming. It was clarity. For the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in my entire adult life, I saw my situation with perfect, crystalline clarity. I was a 70-year-old woman who had spent 35 years raising a son alone, sacrificing my own dreams and opportunities to ensure he had every advantage I could provide. I had worked 2 jobs to pay for his education, attended every school event, cheered from the sidelines of every game, and celebrated every achievement as if it were my own. When David married Amanda, I had welcomed her into our family with open arms, grateful that my son had found love and eager to support their new life together. When the twins were born, I had thrown myself into grandmotherhood with the same devotion I'd shown as a mother, providing endless hours of free childcare, emergency support, and unconditional love. And in return, I had been systematically trained to accept less and less consideration until I'd become someone who could be abandoned in a freezing motel room on Christmas Eve while my family celebrated without me. But the woman sitting in that motel room was not the same woman who had meekly agreed to this arrangement 2 weeks ago. The woman in that room was Margaret Sullivan, who had survived abandonment before and had rebuilt her life from nothing, who had raised a successful son as a single mother in an era when that wasn't easy, who had resources and strength that her family had apparently forgotten about. I pulled out my phone and looked up the number for the nearest car rental agency. It was Christmas Eve, so most businesses were closed, but there was a 24-hour location at the Grand Rapids Airport, about an hour away. I called and reserved a car for immediate pickup. Then I called a taxi company that served the area between Pine Harbor and Grand Rapids. The dispatcher told me it would cost $200 for the trip on Christmas Eve, but a car would be there in 45 minutes. While I waited for the taxi, I packed my suitcase and gathered the Christmas gifts I'd brought for Emma and Lily. I looked around the motel room one last time At the broken heating unit, the thin towels, the faded bedspread that smelled like industrial cleaner. This was what my family had thought was appropriate accommodation for me during the most important holiday of the year. I left a note for David and Amanda at the front desk. David and Amanda, since you felt it was appropriate for me to spend Christmas alone in a freezing motel room while you celebrated with family, I've decided to go home where I can be warm and comfortable. I've taken the rental car back to the airport as planned. The gifts for Emma and Lily are at the front desk. I hope you have the wonderful Christmas you clearly wanted without me. Margaret. The taxi arrived at 10:30 p.m., and I climbed into the back seat with my suitcase and a determination I hadn't felt in years. As we drove away from beautiful Lake Lodge, I didn't look back. I was done looking back. The rental car agency at Grand Rapids Airport was nearly empty, staffed by one tired employee who looked surprised to see a customer on Christmas Eve. But they honored my reservation, and by midnight I was driving south on I-94 in a comfortable sedan with excellent heating, heading home to Ohio. The highway was nearly empty, just me and a few truckers and other travelers who had reasons to be on the road during the early hours of Christmas morning. I drove through the night with Christmas music playing softly on the radio, feeling more peaceful than I had in months. As the miles passed, I had time to think about what I was going to do when I got home. Because this wasn't just about leaving a motel or taking a dramatic stand on Christmas Eve. This was about completely restructuring my relationship with David and Amanda, about establishing new boundaries that would ensure I was never treated this way again. I pulled into my driveway in Millfield at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. My house looked small and quiet after the chaos of the past few days, but it also looked like home. Like a place where I was valued and comfortable and in control of my own life. I made coffee in my own kitchen, sat in my own living room, and waited for my phone to ring. It rang at 7:30 a.m. "Mom?" David's voice was tight with panic. "Where are you? The motel says you checked out and there's a note saying you went home." "I'm home," I said calmly, sipping my coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. "But why? What happened?" "Amanda said she talked to you last night about the heating problem." "Yes, she did. She suggested I sleep in your car in the driveway rather than find space for me inside the cabin where my family was celebrating Christmas." There was a long pause. "Mom, I'm sure there was some misunderstanding." "David," I interrupted, "there was no misunderstanding. When I called to ask for help because I was cold and alone on Christmas Eve, your wife suggested I sleep in a car rather than inconvenience your real family by finding space for me inside. She didn't mean it that way." "David, stop. Just stop. I need you to listen to me very carefully, because this is important." I took a deep breath and said the words I should have said months ago. I am done being treated like I'm disposable. I am done accepting whatever scraps of consideration you and Amanda feel like offering. I am done being grateful for treatment that no loving family would offer to someone they actually cared about. Mom, we do care about you. No, David. You care about having me available when you need something. You care about the convenience I provide and the free services I offer. But you don't care about me as a person whose feelings matter and whose presence adds value to family celebrations. I could hear him trying to formulate a response, probably conferring with Amanda about how to manage this unexpected crisis. David, I want you to understand something, I continued. I have been a good mother to you, a devoted grandmother to Emma and Lily, and a helpful, supportive family member to everyone. But I have also been enabling you and Amanda to treat me poorly by accepting that treatment without complaint. What do you want us to do? He asked, and I could hear genuine confusion in his voice, as if the idea that his behavior needed to change was a foreign concept. I want you to think about whether you want a relationship with me that's based on mutual respect and consideration, or whether you want to continue treating me like hired help who should be grateful for whatever attention you provide. Of course, We want a relationship with you. Then you're going to have to earn it, I said. Because the old relationship, where I said yes to everything and expected nothing in return, is over. I hung up before he could respond. Over the next few hours, my phone rang constantly. David called 6 times. Amanda called 4 times. I didn't answer any of the calls. I was done explaining myself, done justifying my feelings, done accepting excuses for unacceptable behavior. Instead, I spent Christmas morning doing exactly what I wanted to do for the first time in years. I made myself a beautiful breakfast. Eggs Benedict and fresh fruit and coffee that was exactly the strength I preferred. I opened the gifts I'd bought for myself. Books I'd been wanting to read, a soft cashmere scarf, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. At noon, Helen called to check on me. "Margaret, Merry Christmas, how's Michigan?" "I'm not in Michigan," I said. "I'm home. I left last night." "You left? What happened?" I told Helen everything. About being excluded from Christmas dinner, about the heating breaking down, about Amanda's suggestion that I sleep in a car rather than find space for me at the family gathering. "Margaret Sullivan," Helen said when I finished. "I am so proud of you I could cry." "Are you?" "You stood up for yourself. You refused to accept unacceptable treatment. You took control of your own situation instead of waiting for other people to decide what you deserved." We talked for an hour, and Helen helped me understand that what I'd done wasn't selfish or dramatic. It was healthy boundary setting that was long overdue. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called some old friends and made plans. Real plans for activities I wanted to do with people who valued my company. I scheduled dinner with my former coworker Susan for later that week. I made plans to visit my college roommate in Cincinnati. I signed up for a pottery class that started in January. For 3 years, I had organized my entire life around being available for David and Amanda's needs. But as I looked through my calendar and started filling it with activities that interested me, I realized how much of my own life I'd surrendered in service to people who took that service for granted. On December 26th, David and Amanda showed up at my door. I saw their car pull into my driveway through the living room window, and I watched them sit there for several minutes, apparently gathering courage for a conversation they clearly didn't want to have. When they finally knocked, I took my time answering. "Hello, David." "Amanda," I said, opening the door but not inviting them in. "Mom, we need to talk," David said. He looked tired and stressed, probably from dealing with the logistics of getting home without the rental car they'd expected me to return for them. "How did you get home?" I asked. "We had to rent another car," Amanda said, her voice tight with frustration. "It cost us $800 on Christmas Day." $800? The cost of their assumption that I would be available to handle their transportation needs, regardless of how they treated me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't sorry at all. "Would you like to come in?" We sat in my living room, and I waited for them to speak first. I was done making things easier for people who had forgotten how to make things easier for me. "Mom," David began, "we think there's been a big misunderstanding about Christmas." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "Well, we never meant for you to feel excluded or unwanted. The cabin situation was just complicated, and we thought you'd enjoy having some time to yourself." Time to myself. In a freezing motel room. On Christmas. "David," I said calmly, "do you really believe that I enjoyed spending Christmas Eve alone in a motel room with broken heating while you celebrated with family?" "Well, no, but do you think I enjoyed being excluded from Christmas dinner with my granddaughters?" "Mom, it wasn't about excluding you." "David, stop. I need you to listen to me, really listen, without thinking about how to defend what you did." I looked at both of them. My son, who I'd raised to be better than this, and my daughter-in-law, who had somehow convinced herself that abandoning me was reasonable. For 3 years, I have been available whenever you needed me. I have provided free childcare, emergency support, and endless flexibility. I have rearranged my plans, canceled my activities, and prioritized your needs over my own comfort and convenience. They both nodded, probably thinking this was leading to a complaint about not being appreciated enough. But this Christmas taught me something important, I continued. It taught me that you don't see me as a person whose feelings matter. You see me as a resource to be managed, someone who should be grateful for whatever consideration you choose to provide. That's not true, Amanda said quickly. We love you and appreciate everything you do. Amanda, you told me to sleep in a car rather than find space for me at a family Christmas celebration. That is not how you treat someone you love and appreciate. The silence that followed was profound. So here's what's going to change, I said, pulling out a piece of paper where I'd written my new boundaries. I will no longer be available for last-minute childcare requests. If you need help with Emma and Lily, you'll need to ask at least a week in advance, and I'll let you know if I'm available. But what if there's an emergency? David asked. Real emergencies will be handled like real emergencies. But your poor planning or schedule conflicts are not emergencies, I continued, reading from my list. I will no longer rearrange my own plans to accommodate your changing schedules. My time and commitments are as important as yours. Mom, that seems a little rigid. David, treating people with basic consideration isn't rigid. It's normal. I will expect to be included in family celebrations and decisions that affect me. If there isn't room for me at family events, then those events need to be rescheduled or relocated until there is room. But sometimes that's not possible, Amanda protested. Then you'll need to make it possible, or accept that I won't be participating in events where I'm not truly welcome. I folded the paper and looked at both of them directly. Most importantly, I will no longer accept being treated as optional in my own family. I am David's mother and Emma and Lily's grandmother. That relationship is not conditional on my convenience, to you, and it's not subject to the logistics of your other social obligations. What does that mean exactly? Amanda asked. It means that if you want me in your lives, you'll need to treat me like you want me in your lives, with respect, consideration, and the basic courtesy you'd show any person you actually cared about. David and Amanda exchanged glances, clearly trying to process these new expectations. And if we can't agree to these boundaries? David asked. Then, you'll discover what your lives look like without me in them, I said simply. You'll find other childcare arrangements, other sources of support, and other people to take for granted. The conversation continued for another hour, with David and Amanda alternating between apologizing and trying to justify their behavior. But I had said what I needed to say, and I wasn't negotiating. Either they would treat me with respect, or they would learn to manage their lives without my help. Over the following weeks, everything changed. David and Amanda were clearly struggling to adjust to my new boundaries. They had to arrange paid childcare for several events they'd previously assumed I would handle. They had to plan more carefully instead of relying on my last-minute availability. They had to consider my feelings and preferences when making family plans. At first, they seemed resentful of these new requirements, as if I was being unreasonably demanding by expecting basic consideration. But gradually, something interesting happened. As they were forced to treat me with more respect, they began to genuinely appreciate my contributions more. When childcare became something they had to ask for rather than assume, they started expressing more gratitude. When my presence at family events became something they had to earn rather than take for granted, they began including me more thoughtfully. Emma and Lily, meanwhile, seemed relieved that Grandma Margaret was back to her normal self. They hadn't understood why I'd seemed sad and distant in recent months, but they noticed that I was happier and more engaged after Christmas. Grandma Margaret, Emma said during one of our planned visits in January. I'm glad you're not sad anymore. I said before, sweetheart. You seemed sad, Like when grown-ups are worried about something but don't want to tell kids about it. Out of the mouths of babes. Even my 6-year-old granddaughter had noticed that I'd been diminished by the way her parents were treating me. The real test came in March, when David called to ask if I could provide emergency childcare for a business trip that had come up suddenly. "When is the trip?" I asked. "Next week," he said. "Tuesday through Thursday. I know it's short notice, but this is a really important opportunity." "Let me check my calendar," I said, even though I knew it was free. "I have pottery class on Tuesday night and book club on Wednesday, but I could work around those if you really need help." "You would do that?" "David, I'm happy to help when you ask respectfully and give me the chance to consider whether I'm available. What I won't do is drop everything with no notice because you failed to plan ahead." "That's fair," he said, and I could hear that he genuinely meant it. "But I'll need Amanda to confirm childcare details with me directly, not just assume I'll figure everything out." "Of course, she'll call you tonight." When Amanda called, she was polite, specific about timing and expectations, and genuinely grateful for my help. It was the first conversation we'd had in months where she treated me like a person whose time and effort had value. The business trip went smoothly. Emma and Lily had a wonderful time with me, and David and Amanda both expressed sincere appreciation for my help. It was the kind of mutually respectful arrangement that should have been normal all along. In April, they invited me to join them for a long weekend trip to Chicago, a real invitation, to a trip planned with my comfort and preferences in mind, not an afterthought or a logistics solution. "We thought it would be fun to explore the city together," Amanda said when she called to extend the invitation. "The girls are excited about the Children's Museum, and we found a hotel with adjoining rooms so everyone would have privacy, but we'd still be together. Adjoining rooms. So everyone would have privacy, but we'd still be together." It was such a simple concept, but it represented everything that had been missing from our family dynamic. The Chicago trip was wonderful. We visited museums, went to shows, had family dinners where everyone's preferences were considered. Emma and Lily delighted in having both their parents and their grandmother focused on creating fun experiences together. On the last night of the trip, as we sat in the hotel restaurant after the girls had gone to bed, David looked at me across the table. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. Not just for Christmas, but for how we've been treating you for months." "Years," Amanda corrected quietly. "We've been taking you for granted for years." I waited for them to continue. "I don't know how it happened," David said. "Somewhere along the way, we started seeing your help as something we deserved instead of something you chose to give. We forgot that you had your own life and your own needs. We turned you into our backup plan instead of treating you like family," Amanda added. "And then we got angry when you stopped accepting that role." "I'm not angry anymore," I said, which was true. "But I needed you to understand that relationships require mutual respect. That love without consideration isn't really love at all." "We understand now," David said, "and we're grateful that you didn't give up on us completely." "I'll never give up on you," I said, "but I also won't go back to accepting treatment that diminishes me. I raised you to be better than that, David, and I know you're capable of treating people with kindness and respect." "We both are," Amanda said, "and we want to prove that to you." Over the following months, they did prove it. Not through grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but through consistent daily choices to treat me with consideration and respect. They asked instead of assuming. They included instead of excluding. They expressed gratitude instead of taking my help for granted. Most importantly, they began treating me like someone whose presence added value to their lives rather than someone whose absence would be more convenient. By the time Christmas rolled around again, our family dynamic had completely transformed. Instead of being the grandmother who said yes to everything and expected nothing, I had become someone whose opinions mattered, whose comfort was considered, and whose presence was genuinely valued. This Christmas, we spent the holidays together. At my house. All of us, including Amanda's parents, who drove down from Michigan to join the celebration. My dining room was crowded, my guest rooms were full, and my Christmas preparations required coordination and compromise from everyone involved. It was exactly the kind of logistical challenge that Amanda had once claimed made, including me, impossible. But when you actually want someone to be part of your celebration, you find ways to make it work. Emma and Lily opened their presents in my living room, surrounded by grandparents who were all present and accounted for. They performed their Christmas pageant for an audience that included their Grandma Margaret, who applauded and took photos and made them feel celebrated. As I watched my granddaughters play with their new toys while the adults cleaned up Christmas dinner, I reflected on how much had changed since that freezing motel room in Pine Harbor. I was still the same woman who loved her family deeply and was willing to help when they needed support. But I was no longer the woman who accepted whatever treatment they offered, who made herself smaller so their lives could be bigger, who said yes to everything and expected nothing in return. I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean being selfish. It means teaching people how to treat you with the respect you deserve. I had learned that setting boundaries doesn't damage relationships. It creates the foundation for healthier, more honest connections. Most importantly, I had learned that when you stop accepting unacceptable treatment, people who really love you will rise to meet your expectations, and people who don't will reveal themselves for who they really are. David and Amanda rose to meet my expectations. They learned to appreciate what they had by almost losing it completely. They discovered that treating me with respect didn't diminish their lives. It enriched them. And me? I learned that it's never too late to demand the treatment you deserve. That 70 years old is not too old to stand up for yourself, to set boundaries, to refuse to accept less than your worth. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you need to lose you before they can learn to value you. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, sitting alone in a freezing motel room on Christmas Eve, can become the catalyst for the best transformation of your life. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the person who always says yes, who always adjusts your plans for other people's convenience, who accepts whatever consideration others choose to provide, I want you to understand something important. You deserve better. You deserve to be treated with respect and consideration. You deserve to have your feelings matter and your presence valued, and you have more power than you realize to change your situation. You just have to be willing to use it. Stop being grateful for scraps. Stop accepting unacceptable treatment. Stop making yourself smaller so other people's lives can be bigger. Stand up for yourself. Set boundaries. Demand the respect you deserve. Because respect isn't a gift that other people choose to give you. It's a requirement that you choose to enforce. And when you do, you'll discover that the people who really love you will learn to treat you better, and the people who don't will reveal themselves as people you don't need in your life anyway. Either way, you win. That Christmas Eve in the motel taught me that sometimes you have to lose everything to gain everything. Sometimes you have to walk away to find your way home. Sometimes you have to stop being who everyone else wants you to become who you were always meant to be. I'm 70 years old, and I've never been happier. I've never felt more valued. I've never been more certain of my worth. Because I finally learned that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. And when you start treating yourself with respect, everyone else learns to follow your lead. What's your story? When did you realize you deserved better? What was your motel room moment? Share it in the comments below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. Remember to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and demanding the respect you deserve. Because you're never too old, never too late, and never too powerless to rewrite your story. Sometimes you just need the right motivation to begin. And sometimes that motivation comes from sitting alone in a freezing motel room on Christmas Eve, realizing that you've been accepting unacceptable treatment for far too long. Don't wait for your motel room moment. Start demanding the respect you deserve today, because you're worth it. You've always been worth it. You just needed to remember. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.